Deadlock's shop is a little bit complicated, as you can see from the massive pile of items that you can look through in it. Even when it's broken down into different types of items, it can get a little overwhelming to try and figure out what you're supposed to buy, and that's where builds come in. For example, this is a build that I've made for Mina. I'm actually going to be making a video on this particular build and why I like it at some point. But for now, it's just an example of this is what a lot of builds will look like. They'll have little item descriptions of what they are and what they do and like why you should get them. And there's quite a few of them out there, and the way to find them is you go to the build browser, you go to the public page, and you just start looking. There will be lots and lots of builds. If you're just looking for something to play, your best bet is to just look through the top daily ones, because those are the ones that are usually being played the most. Check them out by clicking on them, looking through the items, looking at what it says it's all about using. So, for example, this build's about using Transcendent Cooldown, this one's about Love Bites, this one's about Stamina Mastery, Quicksilver Reload, Boundless Spirit, etc., etc., etc. Some have descriptions, some don't. But for a lot of these, you can just go in, find the build, click on the build, and it'll pull up a build for you to be able to use for the character. Most of the time with builds like this, when they're set up exactly like this, they're meant for you to just buy left or right all the way across the screen, and sometimes they include optional items down here at the bottom. If they're nice, they'll include imbue suggestions on items that imbue other things, like this one does, for example. But sometimes they don't, and that makes it even more complicated. So, double check yourself. For the most part, though, when you find builds like this and you just don't want to worry about it, you can just click Q build, and it'll fill this box, and it'll basically auto-buy those items in that order when you walk into the Curiosity Shop. It doesn't quite work inside the training zone here because tons of different reasons, but that'll typically be how it works in-game, and you won't really have to worry about anything other than when you have enough money for the next item, you go to the shop. Now, what if you want to try and figure things out on your own a little bit? For example, I like playing Mina, and I slowly over time put together a build that I call the Mina Toolbox, where it's just the normal build I'd run for the most part, which is like Quicksilver, Proof Spirit, Cold Front, Spirit Shredder, Swift Striker, Kinetic Dash, Stamina Mastery, and then either Heal Bane or Spell Magic or Debuff Reducer to get all three of my spikes fast, and then it's about getting Cooldown and Tank Buster, Spirit Burn, Magnum, and just being able to walk up to somebody and go, hi, bam, bam, they die. Because that's usually about 2k damage in the later parts of the game. As you can see by the fact that even doing it improperly, I did like 1720 with the Spirit Burn proc. But this is just like my personal choices on it, right? How did I figure this out? I read a lot of different builds from the build section. I figured out what items I liked for my builds, and I put together one that has all my stuff in it. Now, a character like Mina is a bit more complicated because they usually like having a variety of stats and a variety of items. Characters such as Calico can be a little more simple to try and figure stuff out for, because builds like this, for example, they're mostly just two-color builds. So if you can look at builds like this and figure out what are the items, why are you buying them, how good are they, well, then you can look at the build and be like, oh, okay, I understand. We're getting these purple items because they help these abilities do more damage, and these green items to not die as often. The same can be generally said for a character like Haze as well, although Haze usually likes getting a tiny bit of a purple spike. Usually it'll only be like one, maybe two items to get to that exact 4,800 souls mark, and then the rest is just green and orange and figuring out what items are the best. Builds like this are a little more complicated than some of the other ones that I found. Like I said, when you're confused, you can always just go and look at other people's builds and try and figure out. For example, this one's all about bullet dance. You like pressing that alt button and just killing everybody? You could probably go and look at this one. You want one that's more about fixation in general and probably holding down the left click a lot? Go look at something like this with Silencer and Lucky Shot, for example. You get tons of options, but the basic idea is that you can use other people's ideas and figure out what works for you, figure out why their ideas work and why they use them, and figure out if that's exactly what you need in your match. Now, there are other characters that get a bit more complicated, though, and this is more of where true knowledge of the game starts coming into play. The more knowledgeable you are, the better you'll be at figuring out what build to be using. Paradox has tons of different builds that you can use. You can focus builds around the Pulse Grenade, focus builds around the Kinetic Carbine, mostly focus around Time Wall and the Paradox Swap. Build like this is one that I've been having a lot of fun with lately, where you use Echo Shard to cast double Pulse Grenades, and then use Escalating Exposure to make you just shred people. However, there's builds like this, where it's kind of left-click heavy, using Headhunter, Crippling Headshot, Glass Cannon, Transcendent Cooldown. But because of the Transcendent Cooldown and a lot of the other items, it's all about using Time Wall and Paradox Swap to flip people in and out and be able to just shoot them to death yourself, so you don't have to worry about your teammates following through. Or if you go to the build browser, I'm sure you could find different builds that do different things, like this one down here, randomly found, that I have no idea what it's about. it says it's focusing on the kinetic carbine. You can find stuff like that. They're an example of one of those characters that, because you can build them so many ways, you have to try and solve the shop itself a little before you can figure out how to build them. You can often just find builds and pull it up and hit Q build, and it'll probably drag you through pretty well, but it's just one of those things that you may generally want to be a bit more careful of on the more complicated characters like this. Another great example of a character who has tons of builds and you may want to be more careful about just grabbing builds from the shop is the Goo Boy Viscous. For example, there's someone out there who's made a different build for each different type of Viscous that you could play. Gun, ultimate, I think this is throwing the 1. This is about using the 2 and being a supporting character. This is about using the 3 and using it to punch people and get Crushing Fists procs. This character can get wildly complicated, and there's tons of different ways to play them. So you kind of need to be careful when you're just finding builds. However, that doesn't mean that you find a build and it'll be bad for the character. You just need to know what the build does when you're reading it. That's why, in my opinion, make sure that if you're finding a build on a character that you're not sure about how to play, make sure it has like at least some descriptions of the items and at least some descriptions of things. For example, the person who's been making these Viscous builds has done a wonderful job of showing off all of the different things about it and why you would buy it and why they're good and why you'd buy it over other items. Builds get complicated in this game. I'm about 200-ish hours in this game, and only in the past 100 hours have I started making my own builds, not just taking ones from other people. And that's coming with the knowledge that I've played other MOBAs in the past, so I kind of understand how to look through shops once I know what the items generally do and know how to go, all right, so these are the items that'll work for this. These are the items that are good for that. I do think that this shop's a little complicated at the moment. I wonder if we'll get another pass of it in the near future to where they would re-separate out items in the different tiers and be like, all right, here's tier 2 stuff. Here's stuff that gives this stat. Here's stuff that gives this stat. But that could also make the shop a little too crowded. Some of the stuff is just things you're going to have to learn on your own, but like I said, when in doubt, just go to the build browser, go to the public ones, look at the top dailies, click on a build, and then go into your build and click Q build. That's about it. Thanks for watching. Hope you liked this video, and I hope to catch you in the next one.